Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master. And before we get into today's episode, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out with the algorithm, but also we love hearing from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and that's thanks to you. So, thank you so much for being here. So, having said all of that, let's get into it. The prologue to today's game session is a brief recap of recent relevant events. So, our game's primary protagonist was celebrating his 20th birthday when he got a video call from an old teammate of his who lives in Germany. So he, Lance, and Hacker went to go investigate, only to discover that Hydra had a time machine and planned to send high tech equipment back in time 70 years to alter the course of history in their favor. The equipment was destroyed, but our hero found himself stranded in the past between World War I and World War II. And at first, he was worried about creating a butterfly effect, so he tried to lay low. But after a while, it seemed like just being there did have an effect on the timeline. So he concluded that he had nothing to lose anymore. So he became a costumed adventurer during World War II, going by the code name the American Bear. He had a ton of adventures, which were all described in greater detail in the previous video. So check that out if you'd like more information on this era of the game. But suffice it to say, eventually the bear caught back up to the same date that he had left. So now it is technically his 90th birthday. But he looks far younger than that, thanks to the fact that he used his elder form power to not age beyond a certain point. So he always looks like he's maybe 30 or 40 years old. He does have broader shoulders than he used to, larger muscles, a full beard now, that sort of thing. Anyway, so he enters that Hydra base and he ends up saving the lives of Henning, Lance, and Hacker, and he helps the three of them escape. After the Hydra forces are defeated and the entire base is set to self destruct, they run out to an airfield and run up the ramp of the Bear's customized C 130 airplane. The side of it in the front has nose art, kind of like the bombers in World War II had, and the name painted on the side of the plane says Lady Luck. It takes to the skies, and the Hydra base explodes behind them. The other heroes ask the bear what on earth happened to him, and on the flight home, he tells them the whole long winded story. Which brings us to the main plot of this game session. The Lady Luck flies to what used to be an aircraft carrier called the USS Nimitz, but it too has been heavily customized, which feels like a massive understatement. So let me take a quick moment to sort of just explain the ship because it's very strange. So, like we've said before on the podcast, before I took over as the game master, the GM before me was a guy named Jay Mora. And in the last adventure he ran, he gave the bear a castle in Ireland, sort of an expansive headquarters, right? But the problem with that was that our game was not set in Ireland. So I started thinking about how one could go about making a castle mobile. And at first, I was considering the Jawa sandcrawler from Star Wars, which had these like massive tank treads. So, an early concept that I had was a little bit similar to a movie that came out in 2018 called Mortal Engines. But I pretty quickly realized it was not a fantastic idea because it didn't allow us to cross the ocean. So we started trying to come up with a vehicle that could do that and something that was flat on top so that it could even carry a castle. And as you can obviously tell by the channel art for this one, we ended up going with an aircraft carrier. But interestingly enough, when we ran this in March of 1996, it was right around the time that the general public here in the United States was starting to get the internet for the first time, right? And at that point, I had been trying really hard to figure out how much an aircraft carrier costs to see if my character could even afford to buy one or not. And I went to every library I could find. I spoke with every professor at my university, and like no matter what I did, it was always a dead end. And mind you, this is an era before search engines, right? But something that was happening was the college kids, like all of my friends and stuff, were starting to discover email. And we were giving each other what we thought were interesting email addresses. So for instance, some of my friends that were into comics were handing out the email address for various comic book creators. So for the first time ever, we were able to ask questions to people who were famous and working in the industry, right? Stuff like that. Well, at any rate, so one of my friends, I have no idea which one it was now, had the email address for the White House and gave it to me. And like, I didn't know what else to do. I felt like I'd exhausted every other avenue. So I sent an email to the White House asking if normal people were allowed to even own an aircraft carrier, right? And if so, how much does it cost? And amusingly, the answer that I got back was signed by Bill Clinton, who, for anyone who doesn't know, because I know we've got a lot of younger guys that listen to the podcast, he was at the time in 1996, he was the president of the United States, right? Now, mind you, to be perfectly clear, I don't know if this was really him, right? Or maybe it was somebody like that worked for him. I don't know. I will say this. I would think that if it was somebody else answering it, they would sign it something like, John Smith, Secretary of Public Relations or Communications or whatever, right? And it wasn't signed with a name like that, right? It was signed Bill Clinton and it had like the White House logo at the bottom of it and stuff like that. Anyways, so I can't recall the dollar amount anymore because it's been so long ago. But I do know that at the time, I was shocked that what they were asking for the Nimitz specifically, that was the only one they offered me was the Nimitz. Um, they wanted less money than it cost to build a stealth fighter, which I think was called the Nighthawk. I could be wrong. At any rate, I don't have it in front of me right now, but you get the gist. Not the stealth bomber, but the stealth fighter. That costs more than the ship that you would land it on, right? Um, anyways, they thought that I was like some rich guy trying to actually buy an aircraft carrier, and that also I think kind of made us, at least us kids at the time, really did kind of feel like Bill Clinton was trying to sell me the Nimitz as if it were a used car. You know what I mean? It was also funny, by the way, that it was the Nimitz because I had been ripping off an old movie called The Final Countdown, where a guy gets stranded in the past, and when he catches up to what was at the time the modern day, he's sort of made a fortune for himself because he knew what to invest in and all that jazz, right? At any rate, the aircraft carrier in that movie is the Nimitz, right? Anyway, so getting back on topic, so in game, the bear did buy the USS Nimitz from Bill Clinton. And his old friend Shadowstorm used his teleportation powers to then put that castle on the ship. And He also took what was on the flight deck and he put that where the castle used to be. Speaking of Shadowstorm, by the way, when he and Powerhouse went to the UK, where the bear lived at the time, we said that Shadowstorm wandered off for some reason, right? So in this adventure, we find out that the bear had approached Shadowstorm and told him about this whole big time travel situation, right? And offered him a job. So while in real life, Jay had graduated from high school and then joined the army, in the game, his self insert, which was Shadowstorm, graduated from high school and then was working for the bear, doing things like using his teleportation to help customize the Nimitz and turn it into what the bear needed it to be. We also mentioned an alien starship that had crash landed in an old game that Jay ran. So Shadowstorm was also teleporting parts of that starship onto the Nimitz as well, giving it really high levels of technology like anti-gravity generators because we had no idea at the time how to figure out how much a castle weighed, right? And we had no idea if an aircraft carrier could even carry that much weight or not. So we thought that the easiest thing to do was just to bring in alien technology that we could then explain, like, well, for sure it works and this is why, right? Anyway, so the Lady Luck, which has also been given various bits of alien technology, comes in and makes a vertical landing on the grassy flight deck of the ship, which is called the Nematon. Because according to an old English Irish dictionary that I owned in the 90s, Nematon was supposedly an Irish word which meant sanctuary. And because the bear had all of these adventures through the years, he met and befriended a ton of famous superheroes. So he invites all of them out for the ship's maiden voyage from Ireland to New York, which doubles as his 90th birthday party. So when the Lady Luck makes a vertical landing on the flight deck, famous party guests like the X-Men and stuff like that move out of the way. And then the ramp lowers and Lance, Hacker, and Henning walk down onto the ship. And up until now, it was more rare in our game for original characters to meet DC and Marvel characters. So the players had a blast just going around and hobnobbing with the likes of like the Avengers and the Justice League and stuff like that. A lot of the original characters, by the way, asked if they could join those teams, but in every case, the famous heroes always told the newbies that they'd have to earn it, right? That they don't just recruit strangers off the street. As a brief aside, when I ran this back in college, I would often bounce ideas off of my various professors to see what they thought about the stuff I was planning for the game. And I was so new at being a game master that for sure I had imposter syndrome. And I wanted the game to be as good as it could be, right? Anyway, so I had a political science professor named Peter Schramm who said that if you had a situation like this where all the superheroes were in one place for an event like this, he said that the villains would try to take out that ship, that they would get their hands on like a missile or something of that nature, right? And if that failed, they would just attack on their own because at that point the ship is like too good of a target to pass up, right? So we did exactly that. We had Lex Luthor, who of course is getting his hands on missiles in the first Superman movie, so I thought that was very on brand for him. And by the way, at this point, he had incorporated the technology that Mr. Freeze uses into Lex Luthor's green and purple power armor. So then, like Mr. Freeze, Lex Luthor would never grow old and die of old age now on Earth K. Instead, he would stay in fighting shape so that he could continue to battle the Man of Steel, right? Superman. Anyway, so Luthor tries the missile thing. That doesn't work out because the heroes stop it. So when that fails, just all the villains attack. So that was how we celebrated my 20th birthday party in real life, is with this just massive brawl, right? And pretty much everybody who had ever played the game ever was there for that. And the cool thing was that we got some really odd pairings. So instead of like X-Men versus Magneto or like Superman versus Metallo, we had pairings that were more like X-Men versus Metallo or Superman versus Magneto, right? Which I liked because I felt like it wasn't the same old thing. It wasn't something we'd actually seen before. And with so many of those characters being able to fly, most of the flying heroes, when they would fight the villains, they'd kind of tackle them and get them off the ship because, of course, it's the maiden voyage and we really don't want this thing sinking to the ocean floor, right? But still on the deck are the Juggernaut from Marvel, Elson Barber, who is an original character, and at the time he and I were best friends, and a Green Lantern named Gnort. And for anyone who is unfamiliar with Gnort, he is sort of like the comedy relief character of the Green Lantern Corps. The story, at least as it was told to me, was that the guys who run the Green Lantern Corps, who were these aliens called the Owens, they were very into balance. And they sort of like wanted everything to be represented in the Green Lantern Corps, even the idea of ridiculousness. Because according to them, even ridiculousness has its place in the universe. But a Green Lantern ring normally has a bunch of rules that it has to follow. So for instance, in the DC Heroes RPG, the ring's user must have at least 12 APs of willpower. They also need the iron nerves advantage. They need to have a heroic motivation. They have to be honest. They have to be trustworthy, etc. Right? But because Gnort was selected basically for foolishness, right? The Owens turned off all of those safeguards when it came to his specific ring. Anyway, so Kelson fights the Juggernaut, or yeah, Kelson fights the Juggernaut, and the Juggernaut starts to tear apart the power armor that up until now is what Kelson has been using. So Kelson ejects and tries to run away, but the Juggernaut catches him and throws Kelson into the water. And Kelson takes a bunch of damage from this, but he does survive. Then poor Gnort tries his best to stop the Juggernaut, but the Juggernaut kills Gnort and throws him into the ocean too. And Kelson, by the way, was used to playing Dungeons and Dragons, where it is super common to loot the bodies. So Kelson swims over and he steals Gnort's power ring, which again has no safeguards. So while normally it would reject somebody for any kind of a villainous action or, whatever, it doesn't do that, right? So as soon as Kelson puts it on, a Green Lantern uniform materializes on Kelson's body, and he clumsily flies over into the side of the ship, smacking into it because he's not used to the ability of flying yet, right? He doesn't have the hang of it. So in a way, Kelson was a lot like the main character from an old TV show called The Greatest American Hero, because that character also had tremendous powers, but he was really bad at using them. Anyway, so Kelson climbs up onto the flight deck of the ship where Juggernaut charges at him. So Kelson manages to use his power ring to knock Juggernaut into the ocean. And then Kelson makes a glowing green hand that pushes behind Juggernaut, pushing him down towards the ocean floor, using Juggernaut's own power of momentum against him, right? To get him further away from the ship. And in the end, Juggernaut actually drowns, uh, which a normal Green Lantern ring, in my opinion, would take issue with that. Like I said, this one doesn't, right? So it allows it. All the other heroes defeat their respective villains, by the way. And once the villains are locked up or turned over to the authorities or whatever, the normal Green Lantern of Earth flies over, which at the time was Kyle Rayner, and he sees Kelson hitting on Psylocke from the X-Men. And Kelson, by the way, thought that since he was a Green Lantern now, that women would be impressed. But he was wrong. He says some very kind of Bruce Campbell stuff to Psylocke, and she pours a glass of champagne on Kelson's head. Which brings us to the epilogue, which is really just a birthday party with tons of famous guests. And when it comes time for the old bear to give a speech, he tells everybody that there's a crisis coming, which is something we haven't talked about for a couple of episodes now. The bear has, by now, of course, had multiple time travel adventures. And in one of them, he was taken to 1997, where he saw that Necron, Lord of the Unliving, had reanimated the body of the Anti Monitor, who the heroes defeated in 1985. So the bear says that if anybody needs shelter, or if there are any mutants who want to live someplace safe, this ship is basically named Sanctuary for a reason. And anyone who wants to stay is always welcome to stay. But then he says, but Earth K is in danger, right? And everybody needs to get ready. And basically, what the bear is trying to do now is form an army, right? And the ship is kind of like the mobile headquarters for that army. And he just reminds everybody that in about a year from now, they're going to have a big crisis on their hands, right? And of course, by the way, the heroes that he befriended over the years had already been warned about this by him, but there were a lot of characters that didn't fall into that category, like a lot of the rookies, a lot of the original characters that were here. There were a lot of characters finding out about all of this for the first time. Out of game, there were a lot of players where this was their first game they were actually sitting down to, and this was their first experience with our continuity. But yeah, that was it for this one. Like I said, we played it in March of 96, and man, for whatever reason, my players loved the Nematon. We only did stuff with this ship for about a year. Once the crisis was done, we were pretty much done with the ship. But this goofy ship with a castle on top was one of the most wildly popular things I've ever done in my game. Um, and another thing that kind of made this adventure a big deal is this is where Kelson gets his ring. And then in the games after this, Kelson starts to create more rings that are duplicates of his own. They also don't have safeguards, by the way. And he starts handing them out to people. So Heather Searfoss, her boyfriend was a guy named David Allier. He was a comic book fan. She kind of was not. So she wasn't interested enough to like make her own character sheet. So we were like, well, we'll make it easy. We'll just give you a ring. You know what I mean? Um, and so she did that. She made a character that was a self-insert, and she adopted the moniker of Emerald. And then around 1998 or 1999, Tara Brynick was playing the game. She also had a self-insert who got a ring. A couple years after that, Chris Kroos, Dave Eckelberger, Ilea Mosier, Isaac Engelhorn, James Porch, and Rich Sowers all became rookie Green Lanterns. And all of those rings came from Kelson's ring. So they were all lacking safeguards and stuff that would um, usually get in the way of a campaign about rookie Green Lanterns that kind of don't know what they're doing yet. Anyways, because the Green Lantern stuff was also one of the most popular things I've ever done in the game ever, right? That also comes back on this adventure, makes this adventure seem that much more important because it's sort of like the origin story of the first ring in our game, right? If that makes sense. I kind of worded that wrong, but you get the gist. So that makes my players even more nostalgic for this adventure. But yeah, so we really liked this one. We hope, as always, you liked hearing about it. If so, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. And from all of us to all of you, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you next time. Bye.